Thank you, dear representative of the government. Now, the Bank of Greece. Always in the forefront of European initiatives for sustainability and stability and resilience of the financial system. This institution takes national initiatives with national impact, always marked by the personal work by Yannis Stournaras, the governor of the Bank of Greece, for the last few years. At this point, let us welcome Yannis Stournaras, who is going to speak about the perspectives for the new European environment in a discussion related on the European Action Plan for the financial risk and stability. Mrs. Marion Michiridaki, a journalist, is going to speak with the governor of the Bank of Greece. Good afternoon. Good morning, rather, not good afternoon. No. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Mr. Stournaras, that you are here with us in this conference by TMEDE. It is very well known that you have both the experience and the knowledge. You were one of the first that understood how important the climate crisis will be on the financial systems. So we would like to speak about the forthcoming crisis and solutions. Let us start with the basics. Where do we stand now? Do you believe that the climate risk is a systemic menace, a systemic threat for Europe? I want to be optimistic. I believe that yet it is not a systemic threat, but it will become if we not take the necessary measures, both in terms of transition and in terms of adjustment. Firstly, we have the risk of natural disasters. I believe that a logical mind will not doubt that climate change is here. We see the evidence in Europe, especially in the southern part of Europe and Latin America, in the northern part of Europe also, with floods and melting of ice volumes. And also the Mediterranean basin is at the highest risk. All studies show that it is logical to believe that climate crisis is here and it is a serious problem. So the natural disasters might increase the financial risk. This means that the fiscal and financial stability, the risks of bonds and all other financial instruments might be threatened. For example, in the Daniel floods in Thessaly, we had serious problems, not only for the farmers, but also with the banks with the red loans. Fortunately, we had two good banks that gave a good solution. One of these two banks was named by me as the best bank in Greece because they managed all by themselves with their own funds and resources without any support whatsoever to carry out all the support initiatives for the Daniel disaster. So financial stability is influenced by climate change. So given that we need huge investments in the very good and robust infrastructures, do you believe that the European and financial framework, including RRF, are enough? Do you believe that these are enough? Let me give you an example. As regards adjustment, everything is green. But transition is yet in a transitory phase. So let me speak about transition, because now we are going to finalize the plan to convey energy from green resources from RES, along with the grids and networks. All the aforementioned in Europe nowadays demand every year until the year 2030, 3 to 3.5% of the European GDP per year, 550 billions. So this is the threshold. Of course, there is a financial burden at the beginning, but when this infrastructure is finished, we will have cheap energy because the sun and the wind are free. But we have to be very careful when deploying such infrastructure. So we do need the resources now. But for the moment, with the European support framework, you mentioned 60 million, Mr. Representative of the government. Most of these monies go to green energy. As you'll see today in the newspapers, regarding the RRF impact, the largest amount goes for sustainability and green projects. So we've done well until now with public or potentially public monies, RRF included, IB included. But if we want to reach a better level, we have to motivate the private sector as well. That's why we promote the investments movement in Europe. A question, please. Based on our discussion in terms of how we care about the future, with the current geopolitical things in Europe, in the European Union, against Russia, where the USA are against China, it seems that there is no much understanding. Do you think it is realistic that we will manage to take the necessary measures? I do agree that the geopolitical framework is one of the worst that we have experienced in our lifetime. I am older than you. Maybe I don't seem to be. I seem younger, but I am older than you. So right after the Second World War and the Civil War in Greece, I have never remembered any geopolitical crisis like the one we're going through today. Nevertheless, as regards your question, some days ago we had a convention on climate in Brazil. The USA were absent, of course. The leaders, though, agreed to triple financing for transition. So it seems that the world goes towards the appropriate direction, despite the absence of the USA. But nevertheless, we see that China makes important progress lately. In the past, they didn't want to adjust, but nowadays they are leading the changes in green transition, in renewable energy sources, where China has progressed a lot in batteries and grids. So I wish that all other countries are going to follow. So are you optimistic also for USA and the president? Maybe not, but I am always optimistic. I always expect that the positive things will be more than the negative ones. We saw the duties game, but we see in practice that President Trump starts decreasing duties because they understand that this is not good for the USA, as they've seen it with China, with Brazil, etc. Inflation is at 3%, it doesn't fall, it doesn't drop rather. So maybe many analysts expect a higher numbers in the US. Given that climate risk becomes financial risk, what's the role of the central banks? And should the Bank of Greece become more active, intervening with more strict evaluation of climate risk in the banks? The Bank of Greece was one of the first, maybe it was even the first bank that created a department for climate change. Since then, central banks have done a lot. Not all of them, of course. Federal Reserve, for example, hasn't done so. Maybe there were pressures there. Nevertheless, all other banks already have divisions on climate change. Secondly, we have integrated climate change in the targets, in the objectives of our institution, because climate change creates level inflation. So we have incorporated such indicators in all our reports, all our tools. We have instruments related to climate change. And the instruments of our central bank are, for example, bonds that would cover financing or monetary policy. We try to integrate climate change within the banking policy. It's not a simple exercise, but we try to do it. Also, we are also a supervisor, and we supervise the other banks, the commercial banks. So we need to ensure that the bank's portfolios correspond to what happens in the nature. All banks are starting now getting the tools, both the national, the commercial, and the European banks, to have the instruments. We are running climate stress tests, and we do not demand any monies, any funds for climate change nowadays, but starting from the next year, we're going to demand these types of assurances. After running the stress tests, we're going to reach these new indicators that we'll need to keep about climate. So for the moment, we do not demand funds for climate change, but for sure, we expect that climate change is going to be integrated in the various tools that will be used by banks during transition. Now, what about the European Central Bank? Do you believe that the European Central Bank needs to further enhance its supervisor role? I believe that they have done so to such a degree that a more conservative part of analysts at the other side of the Atlantic criticize us because we deal with the climate. But of course, it is self-evident that the climate change is considered one of the biggest risks, both by the banks and the United Nations. It is not enough to leave this matter to the governments only. All of us should take part in dealing with this major risk. If we are not careful, this risk is going to destroy the planet, to destroy life. I believe that all understand we need to take measures. You spoke about Daniel before, and you said that the cost was 3.5 billion for Greece. Also, you said that climate change will create problems that will need more than 2 billion or 1% of the GDP if we don't take measures. What is the benefit from this adjustment? You mentioned the cost, and the Bank of Greece is one of the first that carried out such tests. In Spain, cost is similar, since they are a country of the European South. But nevertheless, this shows that investments for resilience are very important. Daniel, for example, Daniel was a good example. People haven't gotten back to their financial activities despite the subsidies that they have gotten from the government. They still experience the cost of this major distraction. Most of the subsidies have been reimbursed already. Of course, we need to expect that the private insurance players could also contribute, and the insurance gap in Greece is important. In Europe, we see 25%, while in Greece only 4%. We expect everything to be done by the state. So investments for adjustment give a triple benefit to societies. First, infrastructures are more comfortable for the people. Business people sometimes say that while they had the businesses at the center of Daniel, they didn't have distractions because they had invested for protective measures all around. So we have to invest in order to do better. If we visit Finland, we are surprised. When I visited the country for the first time and we landed in the midst of a snowstorm, a very terrifying snowstorm. It was night. I had never again before went through such a snowstorm, but everything was going on as normal in the city. The buses, the cars, people, traffic lights were functioning. Everything was functioning. So we understand that we have to invest in order to become resilient against climate change. And the protection of the society is one thing. Secondly, new investments mean jobs for people. And thirdly, social integration and awareness. So we have a triple benefit from these investments. Since we are here in the TMEDE conference, what does this adjustment means for the constructions industry? Let's look around and see this and marvel at this beautiful building. The constructions industry gives us these jewels of buildings. The Bank of Greece was a sponsor for the renovation of this diamond of a building at the center of Athens. It belongs to the Association of Employees, but of course we were very generous, and the association, the union, gives us this building in order to use it for institutional reasons. But it can be very well seen how progressive this construction industry can be. In the future, we're going to see that the construction industry is going to lead the change towards the new era. After the destructions in Greece, we have understood that this is very important. But of course, we were not the only country that suffers such problems. Financial Times recently had an article where it mentioned examples like Arizona, 50%, 50 degrees Celsius in the summer. They are creating shadowing infrastructures. All in other areas, they do anti-flood. They take anti-flood measures, and we are doing anti-flood measures here also in Greece. So these measures are the first step for adjustability. And that's why we are here today, because we want to see exactly how important the constructions industry is for the future of social life. Now, what about insurance? You mentioned insurance, you mentioned natural disasters. So what about these gap that you mentioned? Is there any role for the financial, for the insurance funds that they could take part? in this journey. You asked me before whether the RRF monies are enough, and at the moment, as I said, that these funds were enough, but now we need to motivate the private sector. PPPs are synergies in between public and private sectors that give a lot of opportunities. Both these sectors have to cooperate in order to help after distractions. But nevertheless, we have to be insured. We have to have money aside in deposits. The transactions statement is too high in Greece just because both the state and the businesses and the private parties believe that it is the state that is going to do everything. We don't need to have deposits aside. Everyone expects a generous insurance system. We expect that the state is going to cover any disaster, but this is not true because the state has many needs: climate change, defense needs, social cohesion. So the state, but on the other hand, putting money aside is not easy. We should not complain because 10 years ago we were at the risk of extinction as a financial state, but now we are a success story. Europeans and the world knows that we still have some problems, but we are a success story because we managed in 10 years to do a miracle. So let's not complain. We do much better. Deposits are increasing steadily. Incomes are increasing. Allow me, Mr. Stournaras, to mention the Eurostat figures. In 2025 shows a higher growth in relation to 2009, but Eurostat says that actual income remained lower than what they used to be. 1 out of 10 employees run the risk of poverty. So how do we explain this when we see the economic indicators becoming better and better? Thank you for this question because it shows exactly the heart of the problem. When we had the crisis, we had twin deficits in the public sector, in the transactions also, because we have to understand which is the causal relation in between these twin deficits. And this causal relation was that we left aside the public debt and the labor costs at the same time. They did not represent any rate of productivity. We believed that money were falling from the sky. No, this was a mistake. So we had two types of deficits in 2009, 15% of the GDP each. So the way of life at that time was a fake one. It was an artificial wellness. So it was a bubble that broke. When you have 15% deficit at the public sector, the markets are going to punish you. That's what happened, and that's why we had the crisis. As a result of this crisis, we had a lowered income, we had a lowered GDP, lowered salaries, actual salaries. This was the same for all Southern European countries, more in Greece, though, because this imbalance was higher than Italy, Spain, or Portugal. All these countries have similar problems like ours. Even last year, in Italy, reached 2007 in salaries. We are one of the poorer countries, though, aren't we? Not really. I'm going to give you some figures of the actual situation. In 2020, in terms of equivalent purchasing power, because this is an indicator to see whether an economy is strong or not, or the income level is strong or not. In order to compare in between countries, we have to consider these differences in prices. So when we read newspaper articles saying that the pensioners from Denmark come to Greece and they are happy because prices are lower, this is a comparison. So based on these comparative indicators, after the major drop in 2020, per capita GDP of Greece was 62% of the European average. Now it's 70, so it runs with 1.5% per year plus. So we shouldn't complain. I do understand many Greek citizens have major difficulties, but consider where we started from. Which are the variables, Mr. Stournaras, that define growth in Greece? And how do we see these in tandem with the challenges of 25, like competitiveness and inflation? I believe that the main drives are investments and reforms. These two will bring about growth. Especially investments have helped us. In 2019, after the major drop, which were less than 10% of the GDP, it were 24 before the crisis, constructions being a major part of that. But nevertheless, in 2019, it was just 11% of the GDP. Today, it is 17% of the GDP. So the increase of investments drove the convergence to the per capita indicators. If we continue investing, then the actual salaries will become higher, will rise, because investments give productivity, and the increase of actual salaries is not leading to a bubble whatsoever, as we had 15 years ago. What about inflation, though? Why do we have such an inflation rate? We need major reforms. I'm optimistic, and I say that if we are low, we can jump higher. So we need to take this leap. We have to lift the obstacles to competitiveness, to competition. But again, inflation remains high. Isn't that so? Indeed, you're right, because in relation to 2.2 in Europe, we are at 3%, so the difference is 0.8. In Europe, we have a negative productivity gap, while we have the opposite in Greece, because we have tourism, for example. 40 million people come every summer, 4 times the population of the country. This is a huge purchasing power. This increases demand. Both the incomes and prices are higher. But what about commodities? Because I've heard about cocoa and how overpriced it is. Now cocoa has dropped in Europe, but now but in Greece, chocolates are still very expensive. This is a phenomenon that we see in many countries. Small economies, especially like Greece, easily are constrained. So that's why we say that we need more competition. We want more businesses, not less businesses. We are in favor of mergers in times of crisis, merging banks, merging businesses. Now we are doing well, so we want more businesses, not less. We want more competition, not less. We want investments that will create entrepreneurship. Which types of reforms are necessary in your opinion? Which are the top 3? Bureaucracy in public sector, Number one, especially licensing businesses. Justice. A progress has been made. A Ministry of Justice had a conference the other month, and we saw that many measures were taken. A trial to be completed needed 1,500 days. Now it's 750 days, 50% increase. But we have to converge to Europe. So bureaucracy. Number two, justice. And number three, demographics. These are the three major problems. But of course, all these three are related to each other. And a fourth one would be the lack of correspondence in between skills and market demands. Just one comment, a political comment about your view on the new political parties that are emerging from two prime ministers.
So I will not comment on political developments, but I will comment on that. Something that managed to drag us out of the financial crisis was political stability, that the governments could take measures. We see that in France, which is a superpower, and it's really difficult for them to vote the budget. I really hope that Greece will never be in this position again. Did you read Mr. Tsipras's book? No comment on that. What about his intervention through this book? Again, no comment. So I think that I have already been clear about my opinions. But of course, it's a democracy. Everybody has the right to vote who they can. Well, you know, Voltaire said that I disagree with you, but I will listen to you. Do you think that the political party of Mr. Tsipras will cover any political gaps? Oh, you insist on that. I will not comment. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.